sin has a checkered past. Peccato, péché, sunde, sin. Whatever language it came in, it was once a terrifying word, a word that struck fear into the heart of almost every European. It had the same kind of emotional effect as words such as Nazi or cancer do for us today. It was something they wanted to avoid at all costs, something dreadful and dangerous. Now it has changed from a Rottweiler into a poodle. Sin has been calmed down, domesticated, neutered. The word is now usually spoken with a slight smirk or a heavy dose of irony. Describing something as sinful usually means we think it is naughty but nice, in the spirit of, I know I shouldn't really, but it will be fun, and I'm sure it won't do any harm. At other times, sinful describes something prescribed by people who just want to stop other people from enjoying themselves. The Pet Shop Boys song, It's a Sin, carries the tone of the oppressed victim, told by finger-wagging killjoys in authority that whatever he does or desires is wrong. When I look back upon my life, it's always with a sense of shame. I've always been the one to blame for everything I long to do, no matter when or where or who, has one thing in common, too. It's a sin. Everything I've ever done, everything I ever do, every place I've ever been, everywhere I'm going, it's a sin. Given all the negativity of the past, it's not surprising that we want to draw the sting out of such an unpleasant idea, diffuse the word, emasculate it, draw out its old venom. Yet there was a very simple reason why the word sin had such a ghastly aura about it in the past. Sin was not harmless transgression of some random moral code invented by repressed and frustrated medieval clerics. For our ancestors, sin described a pattern of life that was quite simply destructive. It destroyed families, friendships, happiness, peace of mind, innocence, love, security, nature, and most importantly, our bond to our Creator. It wrenched us out of our proper place in the world. It put the world out of joint, skewing everything and spreading misery and pain everywhere. A passage in the Bible talks of sinful desires which war against our soul. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 11. That captures it well. These impulses, these patterns of behavior were not just arbitrarily wrong, but were quite literally self-destructive. They waged a constant, subtle and undermining warfare against the inner self. They were the deadly enemy of the soul. What seemed on the surface to be innocent pleasures, or even the promise of an experience that made life worth living, in reality slowly tore people apart. Sin was like a virus that got into everything, so that although life carried on, it never quite worked in the way we felt it ought to. Life always had that grit in the corner of the eye, the nagging soreness of a shoe that doesn't fit, the reminder of a dark secret that won't go away. So this book is an attempt at rehabilitation, or perhaps dehabilitation, restoring sin to its proper place, sending it back to the pit where it belongs. It is a journey through the dark lowlands of sin to the bright landscapes of goodness, breaking the rules or destroying the soul. Why has our understanding of sin undergone such a change? Why do we not fear it as much as we did? Perhaps it is because we have allowed a lopsided view of it to take hold. In many people's minds, sin means simply breaking the rules. If that's all it is, the question arises, especially for a generation conditioned by every possible method of educational philosophy to ask questions is, whose rules? We might reply, God's rules, but that doesn't make it any better. Who is to say what God's rules are? Who interprets God's commands for us and tells us what they should be? Of course, the reply to this question used to be the church, but then we're back with our original problem. Can we really trust the church to tell us what to do? This fallible body of mostly aging men whose own moral record is hardly spotless. The difficulty is that the conception of sin as breaking the rules does not go to the heart of it. A fixation with keeping the rules for their own sake usually betrays that someone has got it wrong somewhere. And not surprisingly, and with some justification, we feel a glimmer of rebellion stirring within us. An insistence on law alone is often a sign of a shriveled, arid moral vision. It's what makes disapproving busybodies and prudes. Laws exist to protect things that are more important than laws. They are not ends in themselves. When we understand that laws are protective, they are to guide vital and valuable things such as human lives, families, marriages, reputations, communities, and peace, then we begin to understand their true function. Laws are vital for the protection of goodness, but they do not themselves go to the heart of goodness. They simply try to ensure its survival. So it is perhaps best to see sin or sins not so much as breaking the rules, but rather as destructive habits. This book sees the seven deadly sins as seven habits of highly destructive people. They are patterns of life which, if we let them take control of us, will unravel all that is good in our lives and will lead us to destroy everything around us. That is why they are to be avoided. However, there is one particular thing about sin that goes to the heart of why Christian moral teaching has always seen it in such stark terms. Life together. There is a story of a Scottish woman who came back from her Presbyterian church one morning to her unbelieving husband, who had stayed at home. He asked her what the sermon was about. The minister preached about sin, she said. What did he say about it? Replied the husband. The answer came back. He was against it. Why do Christians fuss about sin? Why spoil a little harmless fun with such a negative and doleful outlook on life? The answer is important and often misunderstood, and in one way can be stated quite simply. Life is meant to be lived together, but sin isolates us. God is not a simple, solitary figure, the lonely old man with the beard and flowing robes, beloved of cartoonists everywhere. Instead, he is, as the theologians put it, one God in three persons. Without going into the fine details of such theological mathematics, it simply means that God, as Christians understand him, is neither plural nor unitary. The ancient pagans, whether Greek or barbarian, thought there were lots of different gods. The often unstated implication lurking behind this view of the world was a belief that ultimate reality was also plural, irredeemably varied and disparate. The problem with this is that it is hard to find any underlying unity or deep-seated reason to expect things to hold together. The nagging fear is that if underlying reality is varied and plural, then life ultimately is based on conflict between irreconcilable powers or perspectives, and there is no way of ever resolving them. On the other hand, traditional monotheism held that there was just one single, uncomplicated God. This has the advantage of being easy to understand and gets over the difficulty of polytheism. the anxiety that all there is ultimately is endless, irresolvable divergence. But, and it is a big but, especially in the modern world, monotheism carries with it the deep fear that everything has to fit in with this one simple God, and that we all have to be dragooned into line in a dreary, boring sameness. For many modern people, monotheism threatens difference, and therefore also threatens art, creativity, variety, and liberty. And perhaps they have a point. And sometimes monotheists are so convinced that everyone needs to be brought into line that they are willing to resort to violence to impose it. A belief that ultimate reality is unitary, simple, and monochrome threatens us with the possibility that we will all be made to follow suit. Polytheism threatens to bring chaos. Monotheism threatens to bring coercion. Polytheism offers too much freedom. Monotheism offers too little. In the light of their experience of God being present with them in the person of Jesus and in the mysterious experience of the Holy Spirit, the early Christians worked out an understanding of God that was consciously different from other forces. Unlike the Greek and Roman paganism and the Jewish monotheism that surrounded them, the God of the Christians was three in one, made up of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. However, this didn't add up to three gods. The three were somehow bound together in a fundamental unity of mutual love. If this was true of God, then it was also true of the world. The result was a view of life that held together the ultimate unity of all things and the beauty of variety and difference. If true, this of course means that these two major human fears, that on the one hand nothing lies at the end of the rainbow but irreconcilable perspectives and unceasing discord, and that on the other all we find there is dull uniformity, begin to evaporate. Instead, ultimate reality, God Himself, is unity in variety. Difference is to be celebrated, yet not limitless difference. Difference is ultimately held together by love and self-giving. It is a view of the world that values differences of race, personality, taste, gender, and gifts, and yet sees them all blend together in a harmony of delight and tunefulness. There is another important step in this argument. For Christians, humans are said to be made in the image of God. In other words, we are made in some way to resemble God, to reflect something of His nature, and to care for the world in His name. If that is true, we might expect something of this same unity in difference to be true of us as well. Over the past couple of hundred years, especially in Western societies, we have tended to think of ourselves primarily as individuals free to make our own independent choices. We might occasionally choose to associate with other people whom we happen to like, but at root we are independent of each other, free in our sovereign rights over our own bodies and souls. The Christian faith sees it differently. Our true nature is not found in individuality but in belonging. We find our true identity in relationship to others, not in isolation from them, in interdependence, not independence. We are first and foremost members of families, neighborhoods, societies, and groups of friends before we are individuals. Of course, we are individuals and we do have an important measure of personal freedom, but just as God is diversity in unity, so too are we. As the book of Genesis suggests, it is not good for us to be alone. When Jesus spoke about the goal of human life, he often used an illustration common in the Old Testament, a vision of a huge banquet, tables laden with colorful, succulent food and rich red wine, all tucked into by a noisy, warm, and intimate group of friends, with lots of laughter, delight, and satisfaction. It's not the kind of picture we normally associate with religion, but then again, Jesus rarely seemed to fit the expectations of religious people. The point of it is that this is where human life is heading. This is how it is meant to be lived, in harmony, fellowship, and with grace. Sometimes we go to a party where, despite apparent bonhomie, under the surface there is an undercurrent of jealousy, subtle competition as to who can tell the best jokes or impress the most by their jobs, income, or achievements, or barely concealed antagonism and friction. The best parties take place among friends, where none of this rears its head. We can imagine an evening spent with our best friends, where no one feels the need to impress. Everyone is out to ensure that everyone else has the best of times, and all we experience is the generosity of a good host, the kindness of good people, and the sheer fun of being with those we love and who love us. That is the picture we get in the Bible of the true goal of human life. It is meant to be lived together with everyone included. What does this all have to do with sin? Goodness enables us to live well together, to let our differences from each other blend into something creative, beautiful, and enjoyable. Sin, on the other hand, destroys this harmony and ensures that our differences lead to misery and pain. The very things that destroy a good evening together, things like envy, pride, lust, or anger, are what is described as sin. As we shall see, anger, jealousy, and pride break friendships, destroy communities, and leave people in solitary, lonely isolation. Of course, solitude is not a bad thing. We need it from time to time to restore perspectives and to reorient ourselves. Yet it is not ultimately what we are made for. We are made for fellowship, for friendship, to be together with others. And sin in the Christian view of the world is whatever renders us incapable of doing what breaks of doing that and breaks our bonds to each other and ultimately to God, who gives life and breath and joy. Sin isolates us. It makes us unable to maintain a healthy relationship with anyone. I remember traveling through India some years ago and meeting an aged hippie who had somehow got left behind from the 1960s and grown old on drugs, traveling, and Indian religion. It was hard to work out what was the cause and what was the effect, but the result of 20 years traveling on his own had created a thoroughly neurotic, angular, and tortured soul. He had hardly maintained a relationship for longer than a week for the past 10 years and distrusted everyone. He was a bundle of nerves, suspecting everyone of trying to rip him off, full of jealousy, rage, and tension. Encountering him was like meeting a hissing cobra. The nearer I got, the more dangerous he seemed. When I met him, he had been beaten up, robbed of the little he'd owned, and left for dead in a filthy gutter. A group of Christian friends of mine had taken him in and begun to look after him, and slowly he had started to unwind and learn to relate to people again. It was a salutary lesson in what destructive behavior can do. It isolates us, turns everyone into a real or potential enemy, and ultimately makes life a living hell. It was also a lesson in finding the way back, the path of grace and virtue. So it is vital, if we are to live good, healthy lives, enjoying good, healthy relationships, that we learn to avoid those patterns of behavior that destroy us, and the people we love, and in return learn the habits of life that build strong lives and communities. In other words, it's vital that we learn as far as we can to find a way to stop doing sin.